Hey, good morning, church. This is Pastor Johnny hanging out with you. And again, it is such a privilege to not only hang out with you, but also to share God's word with you today. And for those of you who have been kind of walking with us, we have walked starting the beginning of December into this wonderful, honestly, amazing opportunity and time known as Advent. And for those of you who are wondering, what is Advent? I thought it was Christmas. It's the same thing, except when we talk about Advent, it's a theological term that was brought up, hundreds of years ago by desert fathers and theologians that were saying this season, 40 days prior to actual Christmas, we reflect, we prepare, we take the time to look at the story of Christmas, the actual full on story of the arrival of the Messiah and why his arrival matters. That being said, I want to share with you guys a portion of that story, which, whether you've read it before, whether we've studied it before, regardless, there's nothing wrong with us going over a story maybe one more time, because in every time, at least my experience, your experience probably be the same. Anytime we go into God's story again, it's incredible that God's infinite wisdom never ends. So you will go through a story you've gone through before. You will talk about a story you've talked about before. And yet you will find yourself in a moment of awe and profound wonder going, why did I not see this before? Okay. So for today, I want to kind of walk you guys through the story found in Matthew's gospel. And it's found in the second chapter. And we're looking at the visit of the Magi. And I know we're doing this a little backwards. Honestly, chronologically, this is definitely backwards. We've talked about the text of Isaiah, how Isaiah said, even though you're in darkness, there is going to come a day when a great light will show up, right? And then we talked about last week the lineage of Jesus. When you actually look at everyone who's included in the line that brings about the Messiah, according to Matthew, you're like, there's no one perfect on that list. Everyone has some sort of background story, some sort of skeleton in their closet. And then you find out, well, Jesus is the reason why. All of them are included in this line because he's in charge. He is wanting, he has brought himself, he is here on earth because he's trying to redeem that entire line. In fact, it's more than just his lineage. He is redeeming all of humanity. And it goes beyond just that. It goes into the solar system. It goes into the way we understand reality. It goes in, trust me, it's like an onion. You peel one layer and there's another layer. When it comes to salvation, when it comes to the story of Christmas, the layers never end. We find grace upon grace upon grace, and sometimes that grace will overwhelm us. That grace will overwhelm our hearts, and it turns into worship, and it turns into time of just spending it with him and in awe of him. And I want to bring one of those stories to you. And I do want to warn you and say this. This story, even though it is a part of the Christmas story, definitely not intended for children. And it's so funny that when we tell kids a Christmas story, we leave this part out. Well, part of it, I guess. I want to draw your attention to Matthew chapter 2. Okay? So Matthew chapter 2 has the story of the Magi. And we start off, let's just read it together. And then we'll pause and just kind of put the historical pieces, where they belong. So that way we can look at the full narrative and story and go, oh, I see what's going on, right? So it says, after Jesus is born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star and its rising and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes and the people and asked them where the Christ should be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. So far, why is Matthew writing this story? He wants us to know the narrative of how the birth of Jesus came about. Now, at this point, I told you, it's not in chronological order, so we're kind of jumping ahead in the Christmas story. Technically, we'll find out that Jesus by now is probably 2 years old. So he's living in a home. He's with his mama. He's with dad, I'm assuming. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, he should be with dad. Sorry. Dad is still alive, meaning Joseph, right? So here we have the story. Somewhere along the line, in the course of the 2 years since his birth, there are these people called Magi. Okay, so what is a Magi? Tradition also calls them wise men. So we're thinking, okay, so these guys are advisors. They're like, it's like, what do you call them? Sages? Are they like, the wisdom guys or whatever? Well, first off, we have to understand where they're coming from. They're coming from the east. They are coming from the desert. More specifically, they're Arab. Okay, so they're from the area that once upon a time was probably Babylonian or Babylon, right? Or possibly also before Babylon was also the Assyrians. Either way, this is where they're coming from. Now we have to pause and go, what is going on here? We just think, okay, so they're showing up and they're like, oh, we saw this star. That's the other part. These guys, first off, not Jewish at all. They're Gentile, okay? Because anyone who's not Jewish is a Gentile. You already figured that out, right? They're Gentiles that are coming from the other side of the desert. I mean, the deep desert. And they see a star that rises, according to them, in the east. But I want to clarify something. The star that they see rises in their area. That is obviously east from where they are now, which is in Jerusalem. But for them, the star would be in the west because it's guiding them westward. Now you may think, that's great, that's wonderful. Thanks for the geography lesson. No. I want you to pay something very close attention to. Something that you may not even have noticed within the Old Testament. Something that to the random English reader who reads the book of Genesis in its entirety, this is actually something that no one normally catches on to. Whenever you read in Genesis, and for that matter, the Old Testament, again, take my word and go test it. Whenever you see somebody disobeying God, they go east. Isn't that interesting? So as you read the book of Genesis, anytime a family, a member, somebody that God is trying to interact with goes east, they end up, as you're reading the story, they're disobeying God. They're running away from God. There's some sort of, they want nothing to do with God or they don't want to necessarily obey, so they go east. Interesting. But whenever there is someone who chooses to repent and listen to God, their direction is always west. I find that interesting. Because here we have these men who were in the east that somehow are astrologers. Oh, by the way, that's the other thing. These men are looking up at the stars, asking the stars for guidance. Like, let's be real. There's some of us out there who read horoscopes and you take your advice from twinkly things in the sky. And you really think that they're advising you of what's going to happen and be careful and don't get involved with, betting any money on this week's races. Whatever the case is, yes, it's kind of ridiculous and sad that we put our faith in a bunch of stars in the sky. We shouldn't, by the way. These men, that's all they knew. They were astrologers. That's their real title. I know they're called wise men, but there's nothing specifically that tells us that they're wise men. Or it also doesn't tell us the word magi just means that they are astrologers. So we have a group, by the way, we'll get to this, but there's not necessarily three. A lot of the, can we pause here for a second? A lot of the Christmas story is a result of tradition. We have assumed things. And so we assume things, we tell stories a certain way, come to find out that's not actually biblically based. One of them is the fact that we assume that there's three. There's not three, there's three gifts. But there could have been 1, 12, 100 of them. I don't know. But here's what's happening. You're telling me that in the east, in the desert, not where Israel is at all, there's these men that have this resource. We don't know what it is, but I will say this. I will suggest this. Do you not remember that in the east is where Israel was taken? Do you guys remember? Not the Exodus, but rather when they were taken captive, they were removed from Jerusalem and taken to the desert. How many of you know that when it comes to moving from place to place to place, sometimes you forget your stuff? Yeah, okay. There is a chance that some written document was left in the east. And these astrologers, along with looking at the stars, decided that they were going to study these scriptures as well. Somehow they get this idea that the rising of a certain star would signify the birth of the man who is not to be, but is born King of the Jews. So we find out, here's what the story is telling us. These wise men, they go from the east, they see a star. Again, I would want to venture and say, way to go, God, to speak their language. Why? Because their language isn't Israel. Their language isn't Old Testament prophecy. No, their language is astrology. So God takes a star and starts to guide them this way, promising them that the result of the star is the result of a king born of the Jews that, in fact, they want to come and worship. So what do? They show up and they find King Herod. And you heard me right. King Herod. Herod the great. In fact, he is not only king, he is known as a great man. Why? Because he did phenomenal things. Guys, please look into history. When it comes to Herod, he built amazing things. He, in fact, rebuilt the temple. He was the only one, and mind you this, he was the only one that brought peace to the Middle East. And I mean that not all the Middle East. The region that he was in charge of, okay? So Jerusalem, Bethlehem, all that area. He brought actual peace for a long time. He was so good at making the Jewish people happy that Rome looked at him and said, "You're the guy. You're the one that's in charge. We're going to make you king of this area." As a result of him being king, the Jews were happy with him. He was making peace everywhere. But he's an Edomite. There you go, Edomine, whatever it is. His parents, his mom being Arabic and his dad being from it escapes me. It's like Edomine or whatever. He's a Gentile too. He's not Jewish at all, but the Jews kind of respect him for what he did, what he built. And at the same time, Rome is like, we're just going to put you in charge. So there's no one elected. Rather, Rome puts him as the king. There's something interesting about Herod that I need to let you know about, and that is, according to history, Herod was a psychopath. I know that he did great things, and I know he built amazing things. But towards the end of his life, which is the time that we are looking at, he was so paranoid of losing his power that he actually killed 3 of his own sons. The reason why this matters is because of a text that I'm about to read to you. So again, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 2. It says, "Wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem," verse 2, saying, "Where is he who is born King of the Jews?" Mind you, their statement is really not a good one because they're looking at King Herod, who is a fake king established by Rome, not by the Jews, not of the lineage of David. But remember, the promise is there would be a king of the lineage of David that would be the Messiah. They said something. This isn't a young man born to be king. They said he is born king, as in the moment he's born by lineage, he is in fact from the line of David. He is the rightful king of the Jews. You can imagine psychopath Herod hears this, killing his own sons so that he wouldn't lose power to them. And what do you think starts to happen? It says this, "For we saw the star that was rising and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him." Why is all Jerusalem disturbed? Because when the psycho gets mad, everybody's now a target. He can make an order and destroy everyone in the city. He could lash out. They know what he's capable of. So what do? They're like, oh, they're nervous. Jerusalem in its entirety, is nervous. Why? Because they realize this crazy man has now been told that there is a real king and he's in this city. What do we do from there? Well, Herod's a smart guy. Mind you, he's a great politician. So he does what 2 political people do, and that is, let me spin this, okay? So what does he say? As they read to him the biblical text, by the way, I'm getting ahead of myself. He ends up drawing all his religious leaders over, the scribes, the Pharisees, you name it, anybody who's has a Bible and has read it. He says, come here. I need you to tell me. And he does this secretly. The wise men are not involved. He says, I need you to tell me where and when this Messiah was to be born. And they go, well, okay, Herod, we have an answer, which is funny because in John they don't have an answer, but in Matthew they throw something at him, and it's a combination of different texts, so different prophets, and they go, hey, so according to these prophets, it says that he would be born in Bethlehem, and from Bethlehem a great leader would show up. So Bethlehem? How far is Bethlehem? It's in fact 5 miles south of Jerusalem. So he now knows a location. Now he's trying to figure out a time. Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. Why is he asking the time? Because he wants to know, how long has this kid been here? Recently? How old is this kid? Who am I looking for? He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him. Does he really mean that? No. What is Herod trying to do? He's trying to get them to cooperate with his, in fact, political scheme of if I can find the child, see the child, I can kill the child. Why? Because this is what we do when our power in our kingdom is threatened. So he tells them, go ahead, go. Why does he not send soldiers? Why doesn't he send some of his men? Because that would be sketchy and that would be weird. That would cause suspicion. So instead he goes, no, you guys go ahead. I trust you. You come back and you tell me where he is, and then we'll worship him together. After hearing the king, they went their way, and there it was, the star they had at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Can I rewrite that word? Overwhelmed with joy. No. Delirious joy. Delirious joy is a better English translation of an Aramaic term that means it's not. And I want you to paint the picture. These men saw a star, and we have to stop here and say, what in the world is this thing? Because stars don't move. I know you look at the sky, you go, yeah, they do, Pastor Johnny. I've seen them kind of. No. Stars move with the rotation of the earth. I get that, but they themselves do not move. So as the earth turns, they will go around in a certain circle. They don't travel though. So what light is this? And that's the question that has to be. It's not a comet because a comet would not disappear and then reappear. It's not a star because stars don't move in this direction. It's not a UFO, okay, for those of you who watch too much Ancient Aliens. It's not that either. The light of God. It is a movable object that disappears when they get to Jerusalem. And at that point, they find that Herod is the king. Now they're confused. Now they're sad because they're like, we came all this way to worship the true king of the universe, the one and only Messiah that was anticipated, the one who was born king of the Jews. Like, we're here for, and they lost the star. As soon as Herod lets them go, they go outside, and what do they see? The star, zip, reappears and starts to move again. What happens in their soul? Delirious joy. When was the last time that you had delirious joy because you were being led to Jesus, or Jesus was drawing you to himself? Folks, can I share something with you that's always bothered me, and in fact something that I myself have suffered from for many years of my Christian life? We as Christians are not taught how to enjoy God. We're also not taught how to be happy with God, how to be happy in the presence of God. We are taught that we are sinners saved by grace, and that is very little grace, and you are going to hell in a handbasket, and you better be ready. But maybe, just maybe, God might actually let you off the hook, and you will show up to heaven, but it's going to be one of those, don't expect a high five because you are barely here. So then we just think it's fire insurance, and we just, okay, someday when I die, we'll deal with the consequences there. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. And the rest of our lives, we're just constantly living in fear because what if I make a mistake? What if I choose to sin or don't sin or choose not to do something? And then it's the, I don't know how to enjoy Jesus because I know that he's my judge. These men weren't thinking about any of that. You know what they were thinking of? Mind you, Gentile men who are astrologers from an unknown land. Delirious joy. Delirious joy that lived in their heart. Why? Because we're going to go see Jesus. When was the last time, here you are, on your way to spend time with prayer, or maybe on your way to read your Bible, maybe you're on your way to church, and there's just this exuberant amount of delirious joy that takes over. Why? Because you realize, I'm about to go spend time with Jesus. Like, nothing else matters. I don't need anything else. I just need him. Delirious joy takes over these men, and what ends up happening? When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary and his mother. Falling on their knees, they worshiped him. And you heard that right. They worshiped him. They literally laid flat on the ground, which is the term that we see in the Bible. In its original language, they are laying flat and worshiping him. Why? Because he is God. And only God would be worshiped this way. Funny how all the Jewish community has no idea who this kid is. But astrologers from the East, from a weird country who are Gentiles, have discovered that Jesus is the answer to all, that he is the Messiah, that he is the promised one. They worship him, and what do? And then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. 3 gifts. And I know that Christians love to analyze the gifts and go, one has to do with being a king, that's the gold. Frankincense has to do with being a priest, and then myrrh has to do with his death. All of that absolutely makes sense. But if Matthew hasn't said it, and if he hasn't alluded to it, we cannot assume it. Pastor Johnny, what do the gifts mean? Nothing. They just are gifts, and they're gifts appropriate for a king. They worshiped him as God. They presented him with gifts as king. And then warned in a dream, and we're not told who, what, when, or where warned them, but they all woke up and said, we need to go home a different way. So they skip town and they skip Herod. I want to fast forward and tell you what happens right after this. Joseph ends up going to sleep, Joseph being the stepdad, basically, of Jesus. And in a dream, the angel actually tells him, I need you to grab your son and I need you to leave to Egypt now. He raises himself up. By the way, the command that the angel says is get up. The word for get up is literally good morning, time to get up. So it's not morning time, but it's the urgency. Yo, get up now. Go take the kid and his mom. Herod is about to try to kill him. You need to go. Joseph doesn't hesitate at all. Joseph gets up in the middle of the night in the secret of darkness, grabs his kid, grabs Mary, and they run off into Egypt. And we don't hear from them until later on in the story. Why does this matter? Because eventually it's going to fulfill a text of scripture in the Old Testament that said, from Egypt I have summoned my son. They leave. Herod is now back on the stage, and what ends up happening? And then Herod, when he realized that he had been outwitted by the wise men, flew into a rage. He gave orders to massacre all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, in keeping with the time he had learned from the wise men. Then what was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and she refuses to be consoled because they are no more. This is the part of the story we don't tell kids. Why is it that we have some historical issues with this, by the way? Herod, towards the end of his life, psychopath, I told you that. Herod actually had written in his will that upon his death, he wanted to kill one family member of every person in his reigning region so that they too could mourn for him as he dies. I didn't, you understand what I'm saying. He was literally going to kill one person from every family around his area so that they would genuinely mourn when he dies. By the way, this was not carried out. Towards the end of his life, he would literally call for people's death from his deathbed. He would ask hundreds and hundreds and dozens of people to be killed, all because he was threatened, all because of his brain was starting to be affected mentally. He was starting to derail, and so he would just go into these rages and he would just kill people. Why is it that historians say, listen, there's no documentation of him giving the order to kill all the children, boys, ages 2 and younger? Wrap your head around that for a second. 2 years old. Do you know a 2-year-old? Imagine a 2-year-old boy being taken from your hands and slaughtered right in front of you. In Bethlehem and around Bethlehem, there might have been maybe 20, if that. Maybe that's why it's not recorded in history, because there was so much death and so much massacring that he was doing to so many people that this wouldn't have made a blip on the radar. Thinking that he can take care of this problem, he chooses to take things into his own hands. He sends out the word, will you kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem and around the region? He doesn't just go to Bethlehem, he goes everywhere around it. You can imagine the screams, the tears, the outrage that everybody would have had if they had lost their son. That's why it says, reflecting upon the Old Testament, there was a time when Rachel, being buried in the area of Ramah, which again, scholars debate, was it there, was it not there, it doesn't matter. It fulfills this Old Testament text that says she was weeping. Why? Because she her children, her descendants, Israel, were lost. Now, yet again, the people of God are facing death as a result of another man who is a tyrant. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could God let this happen? Can I tell you something? Not everything that happens is His will. That's why we have free will. Sometimes we choose to take our will and we decide, let our kingdom come and our will be done. And when that happens, we make choices that always will affect us and those around us. One man chose to sin, and as a result, dozens of babies die. Is this God's will? No. Why does He let it happen? Because He lets us have free will. But what I understand about God and His logic is even when we choose to ruin everything, He can still take that ruined story and transform it into good and still bring about His kingdom. He probably didn't want to bring it about this way, but He can still change the story so that His kingdom will be seen. He saved His son. He saved His son's family. But as a result, just like Israel's history, time and time and time again, they take the hit. Why? Because this world hates God and hates His people. And there's proof of that today. Can I ask you this as we think about and reflect upon the Christmas story and the time of Advent? What response do you have when it comes to the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, the one who is born King of the Jews? Do you have a delirious joy? Have you allowed the reality to set in that says, to think of a song, do we sing, "Blessed be the name," that no matter comes my way, I will always say, "Blessed be your name"? Have we surrendered ourselves in trust and intimacy with Jesus? That we go, listen, if I have or don't have, in the words of Paul in his theology, if I have food or don't have food, if I'm starving or thirsty, or if I have a ton of water and a ton of In-N-Out. I don't know what you would like, but you think about it and you go, these things do not actually determine my joy. They don't determine my value. They don't determine what matters to me, because in the end, I have Jesus and that's all I need. Is that you? Or maybe there's a part of you that's like King Herod that says, my will be done. My authority. I have to fight people to make sure that my power and my control is always in control. I want to have control of everything, so I will do everything within my power. And when it comes to God trying to reveal Himself to us and trying to reveal His blessings to us, we push away because we think, no, I have to do this. I have to take care of this. Dietrich Bonhoeffer once wrote that discipleship isn't free. Yes, salvation is free and you can receive it freely. But never once did anyone say that it wouldn't cost you everything. Because it cost Jesus everything, it's going to cost you your whole life. So where are you today? Do you understand that Jesus is enough? Do you understand that He is all that you need? Or is there that part of you that says, no, I need more. I need power. I need authority. I need acknowledgement. I need someone to like my videos. I need someone to subscribe. I need someone to acknowledge my existence, to acknowledge what I'm, giving to society, or what I'm giving to one another, or what I have to offer. Or do we live a surrendered, quiet life that goes, man, you give and take away, but my heart will always say, blessed be your name. Because all I need is to be called and drawn to Jesus. He's enough for me. And He brings me delirious joy. Grace and peace be with you. I'm excited for the next week because I'm pretty sure that's Christmas Eve. Don't miss out, all right? We'll talk to you guys later. Grace and peace be with you, and this is the way.